Hey guys, this is Kent. I am here for part one of a multi-part series on how to play Unfair. Now, there are plenty of perfectly good videos out on the internet showing you how to play Unfair. But you're not here because you want to know how to play. You're here because you want to know how to win. And I'm going to take an unconventional approach in creating a multi-part video series explaining first the nuances of the game mechanics and then explaining how to exploit those nuances to your advantage. Now, of course, none of this is necessarily bad, although the very title of the game suggests there is some unfairness involved, and that certainly is true, you'll see. But first, let's take a moment to just appreciate the art on the boxes. This is part of what makes this game so beautiful and attractive. You can see the beautiful funfair laid out in front, but there's the looming danger of something just beyond the horizon. And this art continues to the side. You can see they kind of just repeat this pattern all the way around. They have the scary art on that side and the pleasant art on that side. And then this is one of the expansions. Now, the designer, Joel Finch, is working on creating 25 expansions, one for each letter of the alphabet. And here we have 4, and then there are 6 included in the base game. But he's thought of everything, because if you press these two games together, you can see it does create a nice panorama. And future expansions will extend this panorama to the side, so even the art works together. And of course, I will show you one other thing. If you go ahead and take the boxes apart, there is beautiful printed panorama art on the sides of the interior box, even giving you a preview of some of the card art, some of the attractions. Here you can see there's aliens here, there's a dive-in movie theater there, and then we definitely also need to take a look at this one, because the main box also has some beautiful artwork to it. So there we go, we have Pirate there. On this side of the box, we have what's from the Vampire. On this side, we have Ninja. And on this side, we have Robot. But of course, there's several other themes in here as well. Now, before we dive into the game itself, let me just say that what I'll be doing in each of these episodes is going into depth on one deck. So yeah, I'll cover one of each of these decks in each episode, explaining the cards in that deck, what makes the deck unique, and how to use that deck to your advantage. And then, of course, as we start explaining more decks, I'll start explaining how they work together. And hopefully, that'll teach us something. But let's start with the game itself. Why is it called Unfair? Well, it's supposed to be funfair, except that the F has been left out and it's unfair. That's because this is not a cooperative game. The game is inherently competitive, designed to force conflict in sort of the way that competing amusement park operators would be operating. You know, you can't survive if everyone's going to your opponent's park, so you do have to compete to some extent. However, the game can be modified to be less unfair, and I'll explain that as we go through this series. So just because it has the word unfair, don't let that scare you. It doesn't have to be a mean or bad game. And the one thing I do appreciate about Joel Finch is he has a sense of humor, and throughout all of these instructions and the cards, as you will see, there is a light-hearted sense of fun to this game, even though it may seem to have this sinister undertone. Now, the rulebook itself is beautifully printed. As you see, it kind of imitates a spiral-bound, leather-bound notebook, and it has some very clear instructions. The game itself is not that hard. The basic steps, the basic rules are clearly understood, but each deck introduces new ways of playing, and that's what this multi-part series is for, because if you understand one deck, you don't understand them all. And so it isn't one size fits all. You're going to have to tackle each deck on its own terms. But let's talk about the game mechanics. This is what you probably will find in other videos on the internet, but I'm going to give my own quick spin to it. First of all, the purpose of the game is to win. It's not a cooperative game, so you want to win. You win by having the most victory points at the end of the game. And as the scoring pad shows you, you earn victory points in 5 different ways. You earn victory points by having the most attractions and having the biggest attractions. I'll explain this later, but each attraction's size is determined by the number of icons it has, and the more icons, the more points it's worth. You also get more victory points by completing blueprints. There's a penalty if you incomplete blueprints. The more money you have, you can convert those into points. You also receive special points for special cards and staff members that you may have in your park, and you lose points for how many loans you take out. Now, this sounds complicated, but don't be worried. Ultimately, the goal of the game is to win, and you win by having the most victory points. And you get the most victory points by building attractions, completing blueprints, earning money, other random stuff, and you can lose points by not finishing those blueprints and taking out too many loans. And that's all it is. It's kind of like Catan. There's a number of different strategies you can take to try to earn victory points, and any of those strategies could lead you to a win. But the best way to win is to have a little bit of all of the strategies. In this case, you could win by having the most and the biggest attractions and ignore the rest of this. You could win by having the most coins. You could win by completing blueprints. You could win by having the most staff members. But it's unlikely that you'll win just with a single strategy. You're going to need a combination of these strategies to actually dominate. And so, let me explain how you tackle building your own tabletop fun fair. This is the board. Now, I know I said it's a game. It's a board game in that it has a board, but in reality, you'll see it's pretty much a card game because it's all based upon card decks. There's two different sides of the board, and both sides do the same thing. They just change the orientation. So in this case, all the words are facing us. All the text is facing us on this board. You can see everything's clearly laid out. There's the event deck, the city deck, the blueprint deck, the park deck, and then this says market here, and there's some important things here. Now, if we flip it over to the other side, we still have all those decks. We still have city, blueprint, park, event, except this half of the board is facing us, and this half of the board is facing that side. This is a good orientation if you have players, maybe two players, facing opposite sides of the table. If you're playing with a lot of players, it may be easier just to use this side, so it's facing one person, and everybody gets used to just having to read upside down. That way it's not confusing that some of these market cards are facing this way, some are facing this way. I like to keep all of the market cards on the same side as the park deck because that's where they come from. But that's just the board. Ultimately, you could play the game without the board. It's just a nice way of keeping track where to put the discard piles and the cards itself. Let's take a look inside the box. Now you'll notice some things right away. First of all, there's a scoring pad. Now remember, I showed you this earlier, and this tells you how you earn points for different strategies. That corresponds to these lines here. You would write each player's name in the top, then you write down how many points they got from attractions, how many points they got from blueprints, how many points they got from coins, how many points they got from other things, how many points they lost from loans, and then you'd write down the totals, and the person with the greatest total points at the end of the game wins. However, it's kind of burdensome to use the scoring pad because we are smart, but not when it comes to scoring complicated games like Unfair. So thankfully, the people at Unfair have created an online web-based scoring application. You just visit unfairgame.com and it'll walk you the whole step. It'll just ask you a bunch of questions about your game, and it'll spit out all the results. Who had the most points in each of these categories, who's the ultimate winner. So you never have to use this. It's so much easier to use your phone or your laptop to access the scoring app. And the scoring app gives you a lot more detail than this will too, and it doesn't let you skip anything. So you won't accidentally forget to, you won't forget that 2 coins equals 1 point. Here it kind of looks like maybe each coin equals a point, but it doesn't. 2 coins equals 1 point. And also, as new expansions are added to this game, this scoring pad could become outdated because there's things like, in the expansion we'll talk eventually about the alien influence tokens are worth certain points, but it doesn't say anything about alien influence tokens here. So it'll be easy to forget things if you're not using the online scoring pad. Thankfully, it's super easy, and we can just score our scoring pad in our pencil here for all of eternity and never use it. Now, you may notice some dice. That's an optional thing that only is going to be used in the case of certain decks. You never have to roll dice for a normal game. We also have a little marker here with a whole bunch of people on a roller coaster. This is also optional. You don't have to use it. You can use the regular marker component. Kind of cool looking, but it's a bit bulky. But let's talk about what I've been talking about for this entire first part video, decks. Now, you may be a little bit confused by that because clearly we have different decks here, but why am I talking about decks? Well, they're important because each player who is participating in a game of Unfair will need their own deck in order to play. Let me explain why that is. Let me take one deck out of here, for example. We'll talk about the theme in a moment. But notice that this stack of cards is all bundled together. It says Pirate on the top of it. Now, I won't go into the details of it for now, but all you need to know is that each deck of cards actually contains all of these decks. There's 5 different decks, and they're all contained here. We have the city cards, we have the blueprint cards, we have the event cards, then we have a scoring summary card, a main entrance card, a loan card, a bunch of showcase cards, and a whole lot of park cards. Now, that seems a bit confusing, right? Why does each deck have a bunch of mini decks inside of it? That's because you can the entire game is modular. The more players you have in the game, the more decks you can add. So if you have 1 player in the game, you only need 1 deck. I'll play a 1-player game to show you in the second part of this series. If you have 2 players in the game, you need 2 decks. So you just come over here, you pull a second deck out, and now you have 2 decks. If you have 5 players, guess how many decks you're going to need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Super easy. The reason is because the more players you have in the game, the more cards you're going to need. That just makes common sense. And you just add more cards, 1 deck for each player. Each player can choose their favorite theme. Each deck has a different theme. We'll explain that in a bit. And there we go. All right. So now what we've learned so far is that Unfair is a modular game. We've learned you don't need to use the physical scoring pad. We've learned that the board helps you keep track of the decks. And we learned that each deck contains a bunch of mini decks. So that way you only need to choose 1 big deck per player. In part 2, we're going to talk about how to use these decks to set up the game.